Hi everyone, this is your host Alonso, and we're about to get started here in 4 minutes. Thank you for joining us early today. All right, ladies and gentlemen, please fasten your seatbelts. We're about to get started here with the webinar today. So I want to welcome you all. Today we're going to be talking about a blueprint for developing high impact sales managers. Now, before we get started, I'd like to go over a few items so you know how to participate in today's event. You should see something that looks like the screenshot, not on this slide, but on the next one, please. So you know how to participate in today's event. You should see something that looks like the screenshot. Oh, I'm repeating myself, like the screenshot in this slide. So you're listening and using your computer speaker system by default. Now, if you would prefer to join over the phone, just select telephone in the audio pane and the dialing information will be displayed. You have the opportunity to submit text questions and comments by typing them into the question pane of the control panel. We will address questions in the moment or at the end of the session. Now, here's an important message for you. These live interactive webinars work because of you and because of all the other people who are part of it. There are 2 rules that will help you make the most of this event. Number 1, be generous. Every time there is a new chat or question, poll, chime in, not because you're an expert or because you're smarter than everyone, but because you are generous. The second rule is go first. If you're nervous or would prefer to follow, don't, just try it out and put it out there. We're here to collaborate and discuss. Finally, yes, we are recording this webinar and we will be sending you a copy in the follow-up email. We'll also make sure to include a copy of the slides for you, for those wondering about that. Now, let's move. Perfect. Now, our goal for this webinar is to help you implement sales management development programs that develop more effective sales managers, improve how managers coach, lead and inspire sales teams, and improve the sales performance. Now, I'd like to tell you a little bit about SRG and our presenters today. Our mission here at the Sales Readiness Group is to improve the performance of sales teams by providing customized skills-based training programs that produce sustainable behavior change. The Sales Readiness Group has been ranked as a top sales training company for 10 consecutive years. Now, we have two of the 3 partners today with us, Norman Behar and David Jacoby. The partners have over 100 years of combined experience in sales and sales management. They've trained and consulted organizations in competitive industries like life sciences, tech, financial services, pro services, and manufacturing. And with that, Norman and David, welcome.
Alonso, thank you very much. Pleasure to be here and have so many people interested in this topic. As you probably are aware, at Sales Readiness Group, we're passionate about developing sales teams, and we really believe that to a certain extent really begins with the managers. When people work for a great manager and they have a manager who knows how to manage performance, coach, and lead their teams, you really get a lot of better productivity, and you get better morale, and you get lower turnover rates. So there's just a lot of great things that happen. So I'm really happy to be here with David Jacoby. I'll let David introduce himself, and we'll get started.
Hey, Norm, it's great to be here. Alonso, thank you so much for the great introduction. And, you know, Norm, you and I were talking yesterday about kind of your background and when you first made that transition from a great sales rep to a manager and some of the issues that you confronted. Maybe you can kind of share what you shared with me yesterday.
So you're bringing back something that was actually a pretty painful transition for me, and I think for a lot of sales professionals.
I didn't mean to trigger you, Norman.
No. You mentioned it to me before. So we're going back about 30 years, a little bit over 30 years, and I was with a software company. If you can believe it, they still had software companies 30 years ago, and you know, we were a hot startup company, and we were growing very rapidly, and so at a relatively young age, I was a top performing salesperson. I worked really hard and had a really great relationship with my clients. And so I was promoted into a sales management position. And all of a sudden we were growing fast. I had a team of about 5 or 6 people, and I was telling everyone what to do and, you know, how to do it. And I thought we were doing pretty well because we were in a hot industry and sales were going up. And I got a call from our vice president of human resources, and he wanted to see me, and I really wasn't sure what was up. And I went to his office. He was, you know, my senior by probably at that time another 20, 30 years older than I was, had a lot of experience, someone I knew well. And he said, Norman, sit down for a minute. He said, how do you think things are going? I said, I think they're going pretty well, Jim. And he said, Norman, well, you know, your team really wants to have a revolt. They really are not enjoying working for you. And I said, hey, we're doing really great. How's that? And I was kind of taken aback. And he shared with me that, you know, managing is so different than selling, and that I really had to empower people, to look them through answers, to, you know, really empower the team, and that, you know, that success as a manager is success through others, not about, you know, just your individual performance. And I was young enough at the time where I was able to internalize that, not that he couldn't at any age, but I was really open to learning. And he suggested some books I could read. We didn't have a formal training program at the time. But I guess the takeaway for me was that managing really is different than selling. It's a huge transition, and that when you really learn how to manage, coach, lead, and empower your teams, you get a lot of performance. So that's kind of the short version, David, of my own experience. It was humbling at the time, but I think had really good, profound impact on my career ability to move into sales leadership roles and eventually executive roles with other companies.
Yeah, well, I'm glad you shared the story because I think your story is so common, and with our clients, we just hear that same type of experience over and over and over again, that transition from sales rep to manager.
So let's jump in a little bit and let's just talk about this transition a little bit more. The best sales reps don't always make the best managers. So we're not saying here that a great sales rep can't be a great manager, but you really have to think about what's that person's career goals. Is that someone who really wants to be an individual performer with the spotlight on themselves, in which case they may just be better off staying as a high-performing rep? Or do they have career goals where they really want to move forward in their careers? They're willing to take a little bit of a backseat to their team. Another key aspect of that is that it requires a different skill set, and we'll talk more about that later, about some of the top skills you might use as a sales rep and what skills are most important as a manager. We'll share with you a little bit of research that we did on sales coaching in particular, that those high-impact sales managers spend more time coaching. And we'll also talk a little bit about the concept of leverage. And by leverage, we mean if a manager has anywhere between 3 and 10 direct reports, by getting better performance from 3 to 10 people, it's a lot different than in sales where you're getting one-to-one leverage, whatever you can do individually. Here you're able to get leverage across your entire team. So a lot of really great reasons to develop sales managers. And David, I mentioned some research, and this is research we did with one of our partners, Selling Power, and I'm wondering if you could just kind of take us through the research and share what we learned with our participants today.
Yeah, so real quick, we worked with Selling Power and we surveyed over 400 people in all types of industries. Over half of the respondents were sales leaders. And if you go to the next slide, what we were trying to find out is what are some of the key characteristics of a high-performing team with respect to sales management. And what we found is that about 20% of the organizations were what we call high impact or high performing, meaning that over a majority or over 75% of the reps were achieving quota. So what we noticed about those teams that had 75% or more achieving quota, were 5 key characteristics. They did a great job in coaching, the managers did. The managers were really adept at performance management. They excelled at recruiting and hiring really good reps. They had the trust and respect of their teams. And obviously, this is near and dear to our heart. Those organizations were making investments in training, both at the rep level and the manager level.
So Dave, thanks for sharing that. I think, we'll try and touch on some of those areas as we go through, and I'll share an agenda for this presentation and I'll just share it now. The one thing I would mention is if any of you are interested in that research, we do have a white paper called 5 Hallmarks of High Impact Sales Organizations, and we'd be happy to share that with you. So you can get that at the end of this webinar or at any time by just emailing info@salesreadinessgroup.com. In terms of what we're going to cover today, how sales managers impact results, because that's what we're really looking for, is better business results or better sales results. What are the most important skills that those managers need to have? And we're going to kind of look at those a little bit more granular in terms of hiring the right people, managing performance, coaching the teams, leading those teams, and share some key takeaways. So with that, let's get into our agenda a little bit and want to think about how does sales management improve results? And so we think about just, right here, 6 different ways that sales management skills can improve results. One, it can accelerate sales performance. So if you have newer people on your team, they're going to get up to speed faster. They're going to have better skills, better product knowledge. Again, these are things that managers can impact. I was talking to a very high-growth tech company earlier today, and one of the biggest areas for them is we're growing very rapidly, and we need to onboard people and get them productive more quickly. Another big issue is one of more accurate forecasts. You have a pipeline. The pipeline needs to be managed. How you manage that pipeline and how you basically determine, how you can work with salespeople to move opportunities forward more rapidly and maybe weed out dormant opportunities so you can provide accurate forecasts to management. Hiring is critical. Getting the right people on the team make it a lot easier to manage and to coach them. One of the biggest impacts associated with coaching is helping people improve their selling skills. And then great managers are really good at motivating and leading their teams, and also taking, let's say your company has a vision for the year. How do you translate that vision into something that's meaningful for your team in terms of goals, strategies, and tactics? And so those are some of the skills that really can move the dial incredibly for sales teams. So as Alonzo mentioned, we do really want to keep this interactive. So Alonzo, with your help, I want to bring up our first polling question and just kind of hear from our participants the top 3 areas for improvement. Alonzo, I'm going to leave that technical part of the poll to you. And Dave, you're working with a lot of our clients. What are some of the trends you're seeing right now in terms of key areas for improvement?
Well, we have a lot of interest in coaching. So sales coaching is really huge, and we're going to talk about coaching in depth. And coaching can mean different things to different people, but coaching is really critical. When I think about these categories, I don't want to influence the voting. For me, it all starts with hiring. If you hire the right people, you make the life of the manager. If the manager hires the right people, generally they're making hiring decisions for their team. They can make their lives so much easier.
Great. Well, we've got great audience participation. So, Alonzo, do you want to close and share the poll with us? And we're sharing the polling results, and it's really interesting. So, to your point on coaching, it seems like that's also really important with our participants today, because improving selling skills was the number one response that we received, and improving selling skills directly ties to coaching. Increasing motivation also ties both to coaching and to leadership skills. We really focus on motivation as a key element in coaching and in leading your teams. As you mentioned, Dave, right up there with that is better hiring skills. But in looking at these, all areas are important. Every area received a 39% voting poll or higher. So I think that bodes very, very well in terms of the topics we're going to cover today. Dave, any thoughts you have on this before we move on?
Well, I'm not surprised. I agree with you on your comment. When we think about improved selling skills, as a manager, you can either train people or coach them, and those are really the 2 levers you have. So that doesn't surprise me, and I'm excited to hear that people have an interest in that area, because we'll be talking about coaching today.
So about 2 years ago, Dave, you and I and our third partner, Ray, authored a book called The High Impact Sales Manager. And we talked about this idea of potentially managers getting stuck in a daily grind. And I think that's actually in the introduction to the book. But can you just share with us what you mean by a daily grind? What happens to managers?
Yeah, this is something that we saw over and over and over again with our clients when you actually, I do a lot of intake interviews for customization of our programs. And what really, resonated with me and what I heard consistently was this feeling of, I don't have control over my team. I'm being reactive all the time. I'm responding. I'm putting out fires. But the phone's ringing with client problems. I spend way too much time dealing with low performers and all the problems that low performers create. I have a lot of admin responsibilities. I'm sitting in meetings. But at a really high level, it's this feeling of being reactive and not controlling the team as a true manager or leader needs to do.
Right. And I think what happens here is that managers are really, really busy. They become the chief problem solver for their team. They end up putting in pretty long weeks, particularly if they have to attend a lot of meetings or they have travel. And so they're putting in an immense amount of time. They're really busy. The week probably goes by very, very rapidly. But then the following Monday, that cycle repeats itself. So that's why we use getting stuck in the daily grind, in that cycle has a tendency to repeat itself. And yet, if you think about the bullet points here on the slide, none of these, although they're important, really move your team forward. And so one of the reasons they struggle comes back to this issue we spoke about earlier. And this gets to that difference between sales and sales management. And Dave, I think you see this in the intake interviews all the time, so best probably to have you elaborate on that.
Well, you talked about it earlier. You were talking about your own journey, but we call it the star athlete syndrome, which is a great sales rep. There's this a concept that, hey, if they can sell, they can manage, and they're different skill sets. And we see it in the real world in professional sports that many great professional athletes, don't make the transition to becoming great coaches. In fact, a lot of the best coaches were average athletes, or maybe never even made it to the pro level. And one of the things that we talk about a lot is this idea that great reps, it comes naturally to them, and they get frustrated when they suddenly become managers and people on their team, maybe they're average, so it doesn't come naturally to them. And they get frustrated, well, why can't you figure it out? So there's really a mindset difference between being an individual contributor and being a manager. And as a sales manager, the idea is that, right, the classic definition of management, you achieve success through others. And unless, as a manager, it's critical that you have to make that shift in mindset to saying, I'm no longer the individual, I'm no longer a super sales rep who happens to be managing 7, 8, 9, 10 people. I'm a full-time manager, and my success is based on how well my reps do on my team.
So I think that shift in mindset is critical. Not everyone can make that. That's something I think that companies and organizations should look at very carefully when they look to promote, because a star athlete may turn out to be a wonderful manager if they can make that shift in mindset and really do want to achieve results through their teams. The other thing that has to change is not just mindset, but also skill set. And so when we think about, and I mentioned this earlier, we'd come back to this, is that sales reps, look at the skills on the left. It could be prospecting, it could be asking great questions, active listening skills, managing objections, gaining commitment, obviously developing rapport with people, product knowledge, and managing their own time. And you look at what a sales manager needs to do from a performance management standpoint, setting team goals and priorities, recruiting and selecting the right people, coaching their teams, managing performance on an ongoing basis, leadership and motivation, time management across the entire team. They also need to have a certain depth of knowledge of the industry and their trends so they can share insights with their team, but not a lot of duplication. While those sales skills are still critical for the manager is going to be able to coach to those skills on the left. The new skills they need to develop are pretty considerable. And what we see in a lot of organizations is that there's this investment on the left on sales training. Quite often the managers go through the training with their teams. We 100% believe in that. And then these companies also have leadership development programs. And these leadership development programs are fairly general. It may be a general coaching program or some kind of general leadership program, but it's really not optimized to the sales manager role. And so one of the things that we think is really important is kind of this darker shaded area in the middle, which is really making sure that you have specific training programs for sales managers that are optimized to the sales management role, because the way you would run a sales team is very different than running a functional area like engineering or human resources. So it's not that they shouldn't participate in the leadership training. That may be some excellent training, and of course they should be a part of the sales training, but they really need to develop some very specific skills on their own. And for us, those skills really fall into 4 broad categories. And Dave, I'll turn it back to you to just kind of cover the first of those categories.
Yeah, so just at a high level, the categories are hire, manage, coach, and lead. So you build the team, you manage the team, you coach your players, and then you lead them. So let's just talk about hiring now. And what I wanted just to really quickly focus on is kind of reframe the importance of hiring. I think, when we talk to our clients, people know it's important, but I think they haven't really thought through the cost of making a bad hire and how it can really, hold back an organization. You have recruiting costs, training costs, salary. You risk missing your number. Probably 2 of the biggest things, are lost time. Just the amount of time a manager wastes with a hire that didn't work out is huge, and also customer risk. And I know, Norm, this is something that you've seen a lot. Tell me a little bit, when you talk about customer risk, how you've seen that manifest itself.
I think it comes up, and you mentioned intake interviews, and we talk to our clients about their experience, and sometimes training initiatives are put in place really because a lot of companies are having turnover issues in their sales team. And that may be for a number of reasons. Maybe there's not the right training, but also to your point, maybe they're not necessarily selecting the right people. But the customer risk is that their customers start to grow impatient when their sales rep becomes like a revolving door. So I was working with rep A, then I call from rep B, I'm your new rep, and then maybe rep B doesn't work out and there's some gap they don't hear for about 6 months. So every time you have turnover, it starts to create an opportunity for your competition to really make inroads into your customers. And I think that, from the customer's perspective, they have a very valid point. They want to have some continuity in the person they're working with, and they're looking for exceptional responsiveness, exceptional insights, and exceptional service from the people they're working with. So that customer risk is hard to measure, but my guess is if many organizations went back and looked at what happened to customers where there's been higher turnover, that those customers would far underperform those customers where there's been more stability. So I think that customer risk is very real and not something that a lot of organizations really think through or quantify.
Right. So, shifting back to hiring and how to prevent that, what we recommend is start by creating an ideal profile. What does a sales star look like? What are the competencies that the top, say, 15 to 20% of your reps have? And then drill down a little bit further, and what are the behaviors, right, in each competency that you want to hire around? And then think about interview questions that will help you uncover those behaviors. So we teach people the STAR model, and
Dave, let me ask you a question now. We'll go to the STAR model, but I want to just come back to a quick question because it's something that comes up from a lot of clients. And you mentioned the profile. Can you just cover the difference between, because many clients say, oh, yeah, we have job descriptions, and job descriptions are important. They're externally facing towards the applicant. But can you just kind of cover briefly or at any length you want the difference between a profile and a job description? Because I think that does get into your next point about the STAR questions.
Yeah, there's a lot of overlap, but a job description typically is more like a cookbook or a recipe on how to do the job. The applicant will be required to do A, B, C, D, E, travel X number of days a month, be able to lift more than 50 pounds above their head, whatever. And a profile is more of some of the characteristics, educational characteristics, performance from prior jobs, job experience, intangibles that you want to see. So it goes much more into depth into those characteristics and behaviors that you want in a new hire.
So it really gets to what you're looking for as opposed to what the job requirements are.
Yeah, absolutely.
To derail from STAR, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say that a lot of companies don't clearly define what they're looking for. So it's very difficult to make good hiring decisions if there's no consistency in terms of what you're looking for. And then you get a lot of default hiring, which would be, left to their own devices, people tend to like people who are like themselves, right? It's human nature. So that's how you get situations where the hiring manager or the sales manager just hires people like him or her. And that kind of becomes a default quote unquote culture. So we really we recommend that sales managers ask great drill down questions to uncover the behaviors they want the person to do on the job. And, one challenge that managers have is that they ask a lot of leading questions. So for example, hey, we want a self-starter, someone who's really motivated. So, Norm, if you just let me put you on the spot for a second. Hey, Norm, at SRG, we're a really fast growing company. We really want self-starters. Are you motivated?
Hey, David, I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah, I'm super motivated. I was reading a little bit about your company on the internet and seeing kind of the progress that you guys are making. And yeah, I'd be really excited to join the team here, and I'd certainly work really hard to help achieve all the objectives that the company set forward.
Yeah, so, from that little interchange, I gather absolutely nothing of real value. I mean, Norm's a great guy, but, what did I really learn? So, Norm, maybe you could walk us through, if you are the hiring manager using the STAR questioning model, where you want to uncover whether someone is motivated or not.
Sure, and I would say, this works, just backing up one point, when we want to understand maybe from your current top performers as you start to build that job profile is, what are those characteristics that you're looking for? As David mentioned, it could be motivation, it could be integrity. If you have a field sales team, maybe the ability to work independently. Following David's lead on motivation, if motivation is something that's really important, I might say, hey, David, one of the things that we found is that, people who are really motivated perform very well here. You mentioned that you're, really excited, and that's great. Can you just describe a situation where you accomplished something that really required a lot of motivation? And then I'm going to go into active listening skills and just really see if he can describe a situation that he was personally in, he or she, but was personally in that required motivation. And then I'm going to ask, can you tell me a little bit more about that? What were the tasks that were involved? Yeah, what were some of the actions? And the reason I want to ask about actions is if he shared something that was fairly broad, that might be something that happened in his last company, I want to see what specific actions he was involved with. And then I want to understand how that worked out and ask for the result. And what this does is allows me to become an active listener to really think about, is this person have the skill or have the characteristic of motivation that I'm looking for? And, again, I could have used this question for integrity. I could have used this for a question for independence. I could use this questioning model for resilience. So the STAR questioning model is a pretty popular model, but I think it's one that works particularly well for interviewing sales professionals.
Okay, great. And Norm, you're going to walk us through the next key skill area for managers, which is managing performance.
Well, I mean, if you think the name sales manager, this is just a implied part of the job, which is managing performance. It's something that someone didn't have to do as a sales rep. They really weren't managing the performance of a team. And so it's really important to have a framework for managing performance. And so, again, I'd like to lean on Alonzo a little bit here just to bring up a poll question. And, what we'd like to understand from our participants is, when you think about performance management challenges, which of these four really stand out in your mind? Is that the managers haven't clearly communicated expectations, they're not doing a great job of managing sales activity levels, they avoid having difficult conversations, or they don't necessarily take action with low performers soon enough? And be interesting because all these are key aspects of performance management, and we've gotten different answers from different groups of participants in the past. So we'll leave that open. Dave, from your own perspective, again, I'm not looking for you to bias the poll in any way, but based on client intakes, when you think about managing sales performance, is there one or more of these that really stand out in your mind?
And these are all, I hear every single one of these. Every single one comes up consistently.
So I'm curious because what I'm seeing is more variation here than I've seen in the last poll that we ran. So, Alonzo, if you want to go ahead and close the poll, I think it's a pretty simple poll, and share the results. We can look through it.
I'm a little surprised on communicating expectations. I mean, typically, Norm, I was about to say that would probably be one of my top ones, so I'm obviously not in tune with our group today.
I'm surprised too, because we found sometimes a lot of times what the manager sees as clear communication is not something necessarily that the sales rep can repeat back to them. So there's often confusion. But let's go with our audience, because that's the group we're really focused on today. Managing sales activity levels, tough. In fact, I had my own intake interview with a group from an industrial company I'm working with this morning. And his number one concern was about activity levels and the level of prospecting required to get new business. So I heard that kind of firsthand from a client this morning. Having difficult conversations, I think we try and avoid difficult conversations, whether it's in our professional life or personal life. it actually feels kind of good to get it off your chest and actually start dealing proactively. And you're actually doing the sales professional a favor by having that conversation earlier rather than later. And then taking action with low performers, it sounds like from our audience, that's not such a difficult area for many, but what we at least see from many clients is that chronic low performers stay in their jobs longer than they should, and they end up taking up an inordinate amount of time with the manager, where the manager is spending too much time with someone who has consistently low performance. And it may be that that person could be, better suited for another job and really isn't in the right position. So again, really interesting, particularly around the sales activity levels and the difficult conversations. So with that, I think that's a nice framework for just taking a look at the model, because when you think about managing sales performance, what you really want to think about is what are those behaviors, and one of those behaviors leads to sales activity levels that will result in positive and consistent results. And one of the things that we see, and this is really in due part to many of the dashboards that you might see off your CRM system, is many of the dashboards are really results driven. And it's not that we don't want to measure results. Results are really important, but results are also backwards looking. So we want to make sure that we have key performance indicators that are forward looking in the form of sales behaviors, like going out on more sales calls, submitting more proposals, those type of activities and behaviors that lead to the results. And so we want to be looking out the front of the windshield, not through a rear view mirror. And so while we do want to measure results, we actually want to manage and measure behaviors. And just a quick way to think about that would be, if you thought about weight loss, you can't just lose weight by getting on the scale every day. That may give you the motivation to lose weight, but two things that could lead to that might be diet and exercise. So we really think about what are those behaviors, and we only use this slide as a way of thinking about if those are sales results, what are those activities that tie to the sales results. And so without getting into a training, what we would just say is, here's some of the areas that are important. One is communicate and monitor the critical success factors. So what is it we expect our salespeople and our sales team to be able to accomplish, and make sure that's communicated not just as a group basis, but individually, so each individual understands what's expected of them. Identify, hopefully collaboratively, what are the key behaviors that will tie to that success, and then start to analyze gains and gaps in behaviors. Gains are things they're doing better than expected, so we want to reinforce those. They're getting out on more first-time appointments or setting up more calls. Those would be performance gains. Gaps could be some that tied to lower activity levels than we would have expected. We then want to think about what are the underlying causes. I recall that motivation came up earlier in one of our slides. Maybe a lack of motivation, maybe a lack of skill. So if there are performance gaps, what's driving that? And then, of course, once you understand the cause, it's not too hard to understand what action you need to take. If it's motivation, example, you may look to performance counseling. If it's skills-based, you may look to training and coaching. So again, this is just a system we like to have that creates not only more effective performance management for the managers, but also if you have a larger team where you have multiple managers, it starts to provide a level of consistency in how they manage. So those are just some thoughts around performance management. It's a critical area, and obviously one of the top responsibilities of a sales manager. Dave, the next area, and the one that we identified with our research with Selling Power as being the most important success factor, is the area of coaching. So maybe just a couple thoughts around coaching.
Yeah, so when we think about coaching, I think about skills coaching, which people brought up in one of the polls as one of their top priorities, and deal coaching, which you typically do in a pipeline review. I think most managers are really good on deal coaching. Skills coaching is where we see they need some help. So the benefits of coaching really is that it creates leverage for the manager, and that ties back to the idea of achieving success through others. So when reps know or become better at selling, they can solve their own problems without dragging you into the deal. And as their skills improve, the results will improve. I think when we talked about the daily grind, when your team is getting better at selling, you spend less time putting out fires. So you move from being the chief, problem solver to being a true manager.
So, Dave, when we think about coaching and we think a little bit about the level of interest we get in management training from our clients, we think about just kind of what's going on in our industry. Coaching is a really hot topic, and many, many companies and organizations are interested in coaching, and yet managers still struggle with that. And so, be interesting. And Alonzo, I think we have a little bit different method of interaction here, but I'm going to bring up a chat. And the way we want you to respond to the chat is to simply go to the question panel and just type in your responses. So Alonzo said, please try and be generous. We'd love to hear what you have to say, because it's not that most managers don't think that coaching is important, but managers struggle. And so what we're interested in is, what are the most significant coaching challenges your managers face? Alonzo, did I get that right? They can just type into the question panel?
Yes, that's correct, everyone. So again, in the side panel, there is a question box. You can submit your comments there. And I can already see, Norman, some people participating. Daniel Reyes is saying allocate time, define an agenda for coaching. Then we have James Palmiciano saying same thing, time. We have Rain Kensman saying having a specific process or plan for coaching. I'll let you keep reading if you want from here, Norman.
Sure, I've got it. So not understanding the coaching process, follow-up on coaching follow-up, knowing how to utilize new technology. So this is really good input. I've seen time come up a couple of times. Really appreciate some other thoughts. This one is great because it comes up all the time. Came up in a conversation I had this morning. What's the difference between coaching, teaching, telling, mentoring, and giving feedback? So coaching is often misunderstood. It could be very broad or very narrow. And again, I do think I think it's Cynthia that put up that comment. Really good insights there. Not letting producers solve problems, but providing solutions. So they're basically becoming the chief problem solver. They're going to give them the answer as opposed to having them self-discover the answer. Another challenge is low adequate. They don't necessarily have enough training budget or sales enablement budget. They think that when they provide feedback, they're giving coaching, but it may or may not be true coaching that they're delivering. Really good comments here. Maybe take one or two. Lack of consistency would be one. So coaching shouldn't be kind of a one and done thing. We actually have a quarterly rhythm to our coaching that involves a lot of listening in on calls or observation of calls. So I think John's point is spot on in terms of doing it on a consistent basis. So I'm going to, Alonzo, we're going to kind of close the question poll right now. And those are some really good thoughts. In fact, David, they may be just as complete, if not more complete, than some of the challenges we see.
Yeah, well, we have a smart audience. What we typically see is managers, they don't know how to coach. What they think is coaching really isn't coaching. They substitute telling for coaching. They're not allocating their time properly. I'll get into that in a minute. They don't really have a consistent coaching process. Again, it gets to not knowing how to coach. And one thing we see culturally is that sometimes coaching is viewed as a remedial management intervention. And people get defensive as opposed to the idea that every rep is going to get coached, irrespective of skill level.
So you mentioned about getting to the amount of time. What were your thoughts around time? And, we talked a little bit about the chronic underperformers, but can you give us any guidelines for how managers should spend their time coaching?
What we recommend is you focus on the middle. So coaching is a great intervention when a skill is somewhere in the middle and you're average at something. So there has to be some baseline level of skill before coaching makes a lot of sense. So for people who have average skills, say if you have a team of 10, the middle 5 or 6, they should get about 60% of your time. the people at the bottom, maybe 15 to 20%, and then your top, 2 or 3 performers, maybe 20 to 25%. And I think when you talk to managers and you ask them, why are you so busy? What you'll find is they're spending way too much time with their bottom performing reps. And that may not be a coaching issue or a training issue. It could have been a hiring issue that those people, may be in the wrong position. And so no amount of coaching is going to move someone who is a really bottom performer to the middle or to the top. So that's why we recommend spending the majority of your time with average performers, with the idea that if you move the average, over one notch to the right-hand side of the bell-shaped curve, you can dramatically improve your performance.
Right. I think that idea of moving the middle is really important. A question that often comes up is, how about if I have some new hires that are low performers? Any special advice regarding new hires during the onboarding period?
Yeah, my time allocation is very different for new hires. New hires need a substantial amount of time. The idea there is you want them to be successful. You want to have a very well-defined onboarding process. A mistake we see a lot of people make is they ignore their new hires, and then 9 months later there's a problem. And at that point, it's really not so much a coaching problem, it was an onboarding problem, and it may be too late. So for new hires, you really want to over-invest in coaching with the idea that it'll pay off down the road.
Sounds good. I think that's really important just in terms of thinking about how to spend that time. And the other thing is that I think a lot of people think about coaching as a coaching process, and that's really important. But I know from our perspective, we think about coaching a little bit more broadly. It's not just how to coach, but, you want to just kind of walk us through what we mean by a coaching mindset and determining what areas to coach on?
Yeah, when I talk about a mindset, it's really shifting your framework from managing to coaching. So coaching is not performance management. And coaching, you have to have a mindset of creating a trusted, safe space where you and your rep can work on a skill together, and the rep can fail and not feel that he or she is going to be get a performance improvement plan. Coaching isn't the right management intervention in every situation. Again, use coaching when the skills are average, but if the skills are below average, maybe it's a training issue. If the person's really good at something, give them more responsibility, empower them. We talked about a coaching mindset, but to me, one of the key skills that you as a manager can practice to have a coaching mindset is, I like to call it the 3 A's, which is actively listen, be a great listener, ask first, ask questions, don't launch in and tell, and then assume best intentions, meaning assume that your reps want to get better, they're not trying to cheat or game the system, and that they're going into that coaching situation wanting to sell more. And they may have legitimate problems or concerns that are blocking them from being successful. So you should listen and ask questions to understand their point of view. So if you have the right mindset, then it comes down to analyzing the performance before your coach. And here really the key idea is you do it together with the rep. What that means is that you just don't go in and say, hey, Norman, you're not doing a really good job in asking questions. People get defensive, when you tell them what to do. So co-assessing and analyzing a performance issue together is important. And the reason is that when you shift the burden of behavior change to the other person and let them co-create the solution with you, they're going to do all the heavy lifting, not you. And that makes a huge difference in coaching. So when you discuss performance, it should be collaborative, where you both come up with, hey, this quarter, we're going to focus on these 2 skills to work on. How does that sound? So you're just not walking in saying, you did this wrong, this wrong, this wrong, so I want you to work on this. When it comes time to coaching, we like to focus on an observation coaching model, meaning you do planning first. You plan out the sales calls that you want to observe, that you want the coaching to be constructed around. Before you go on the call, you kind of brief each other. The rep tells you the background of the account. You kind of define roles and responsibilities. Third thing is you want to be in observation mode as a sales manager. You don't want to take over the call. You then want to debrief and give coaching feedback and have clear and consistent follow-up. Common coaching challenges that we see are that people get defensive when they get feedback, and you have to be really careful on how you deliver the coaching feedback. Ultimately, people, again, most reps will want to get better. So it's important that you work with the reps so that they don't let human nature being defensive get in the way of receiving good coaching feedback. And I talked about allocating coaching time, and there the idea is spend most of your time with your average performers, then your high performers. And this is counterintuitive, again, the least amount of time with your low performers. That's probably the number one cause for managers wasting time, is too much time spent trying to salvage significant underperformance.
So Dave, I think that's really helpful. One point I'd like to just elaborate on is that idea of the debrief. You mentioned that people can become defensive. And just like we want to have co-assessment to really determine what skills we should be working on from an analysis standpoint, the debrief, we also want that to be collaborative. So by asking great questions, we can actually get the sales rep to analyze a call and possibly self-discover some of the things that went wrong. The benefits of that is they're not going to get defensive. They're the ones bringing it up. And number two, they're going to take more ownership for behavior change. Obviously, not everyone's self-aware, so as a manager, it is your responsibility to bring it up if the sales reps don't identify it first. But by asking some right questions and being trained to ask those kind of discovery questions, we find that, again, we could even make the debrief a very collaborative process. I want to touch on one other aspect that we spoke about that I think is really important. It's something that has become really popular for frontline managers, which is sales leadership, which is different than generic leadership. And sales leadership, I think the reason it's so important is because when I think back on my own personal experiences and I talk to other people, what we really remember are the managers that were great coaches and great leaders. And when you work for a great leader, it elevates the entire team. They can, you have people with a positive attitude. You don't have people in the coffee room kind of, bickering or sharing negative thoughts. You're getting people that are really collaborative and pulling together. So this idea of developing leaders is really important, and in particular, means sales leaders. And again, just some of the differences between being a great manager and a leader is managers are often reactive, leaders are proactive. They motivate and inspire as opposed to just directing. They're thinking a little bit longer term. Again, I was talking to a great sales leader this morning, and he was talking about bringing high potentials into his coaching program, not because they have a team today, because he's already planning for the future. And that level of motivation it creates by bringing his high potentials into the coaching program is, hey, we want to make an investment. We believe in you. They are really initiators of change. They're not just waiting for something to come down from up above and then saying, well, how are we going to manage that? And they, get people really excited, and they understand that people have different motives. For some of us reps, it might be about money. For others, it might be about recognition. For others, it might be about the ability to work individually. For others, they love to work collaboratively. So be able to understand and have kind of that level of emotional intelligence to understand what's important to different individuals. And what we find is that it really translates into 4 areas. One is this idea of being able to communicate a sales vision, getting people to rally behind that, to understand what are the strategies, the goals, and the tactics that we need to do as a team to pull that off. They're really good at making decisions. They kind of understand the importance of the decision, what the factors to consider. People can typically live with a well thought out yes or no, but maybes create a lot of indecisiveness. They know how to influence and motivate, and they're always working on getting better themselves. So, we touched on, 4 key aspects of, sales management that I think are really important. And Dave, maybe I'll just turn it back to you to kind of summarize those areas, if that's okay.
Sure, that'd be great. So I know we covered a lot today, but just kind of some key takeaways from our webinar. The first, and I think this is most critical, is that managing requires a different set of skills than selling. We firmly believe, and our research backs this up, that when you invest in training your managers, that has an exceptionally high ROI. And if you just kind of think about it, it's intuitive. A manager on average manages, say, 8 to 10 reps. So that investment is leveraged over those reps. So if you have a better manager, those 8 to 10 reps are going to sell better, and that's where you get your high ROI. We think about 4 key abilities that managers need. They need to hire the right people. They need to manage sales performance. We talked about managing activities, which is forward-looking, not so much results, which are backward-looking. Sales coaching, spent a lot of time there, and also leading and motivating your team. And finally, when you have better managers, as I said before, you get better sales results.
So with that, I want to thank you, and I want to turn it back to Alonzo. Obviously, if you'd like to have more information, you can contact us by phone or by email. Also, encourage you to subscribe to our blog. We have a lot of, I think, really good content we're putting out there in terms of written content, video content, research reports from time to time. So Alonzo, I'll call you back in to kind of wrap up for us, and also if we have any questions, we certainly have a little bit of time for some Q&A.
Yes, thank you, Norman. Just let's give a chance to everyone to submit any final questions right now. Please click on the question box and type them in. If you ask them during the webinar and we forgot to respond, this is your chance to kind of like remind us. Or if you have any new questions, we will be happy to take them right now. So I'm gonna give you guys around like 10 seconds, see if anybody submits anything. I'm not seeing anything coming in. Okay, so that's good. That means we answered most of your questions during the webinar. With that said, in the interest of time, I'm going to wrap this up. Norman, it was an excellent presentation. Thank you so much. One thing that I wanted to let you guys know is as soon as we close this webinar, there's going to be a short survey showing up on your screen. We appreciate any feedback you may have for us. We're always trying to improve this program, so that's highly appreciated. Norman, David, thank you, and thank you everyone for joining us today.
Thank you, Alonzo.